One quick thing to note before I start the video is that I'm not going to be doing the Google Forms anymore. I used the Google Forms during the first few months of doing this iceberg because I basically had nothing to go off of, but since, Wendigoon posted his video and other people have done similar conspiracy icebergs, there's been a lot more interest in this type of stuff, so it's a lot easier for me to find resources on Google just by searching up the terms. So I don't really have a use for the Google Forms anymore, and on top of that, I also have somebody in the background researching this stuff for me, so I don't really need the Google Forms anyways. Even if I were to not have, an easy time doing this, I have someone else also helping me along the way. However, I do want to give a thanks to everyone, but I will do that at the end of the video. Welcome to layer 5 of the Chart of Truth iceberg, aka the crazy conspiracy iceberg. If you haven't seen the previous parts to this series, there are 4 other parts that are currently out, so go check those out, as I will leave a link to a playlist containing all of the parts below. Keep in mind that when I did the first part, I was a lot more opinionated and more focused on debunking everything. I, however, did stop doing this come around to part 2, 3, and 4. So don't expect that going into the rest of the series, even if you watch part 1. Let's not delay this any further and get into layer 5 of the Chart of Truth iceberg. Kicking this one off is going to be Saturn Rings. Saturn Rings is the idea that the rings of Saturn were formed when an asteroid hit Saturn and exploded. After exploding, it caused various particles and mess of the asteroid to be caught in Saturn's gravitational pull, creating the rings that we see today. Now, to be fair, there are actually tons of theories and interesting tidbits surrounding Saturn's rings. One of those fun tidbits is the fact that you can actually see the rings just standing here on Earth. Some have photographed Saturn very early in the morning, nicknaming the planet the Eye in the Sky, due to the similar resemblance it bears to the human eyeball. If we choose to believe these two tidbits, the fact that we can see Saturn and believe that Saturn's rings were created by this asteroid, there is a third, somewhat smaller but more disturbing conspiracy theory that people choose to believe in, which is the fact that if that's true, if the fact that we can see Saturn from our naked eye and an asteroid hit it and that's how it was created, it's entirely possible that one day, maybe not soon far from today, that we might be hit by an asteroid because Earth isn't so far off from Saturn. Extreme continents. This one was a bit vague, but based on the vague descriptor that I was given, I think this one has to do with the extreme locations on Earth that hold world records for their geophysical features, meteorological features, and extreme climates. Think like the North Pole or the South Pole. These places are nearly uninhabitable for parts of the year and sometimes even the entire year. Some believe that the fact that we are not allowed to go to these places during certain parts of the year could be a ploy for secret groups to meet without anyone knowing, and that these places are actually livable. It's just fear keeping people out of them. Extreme continents, being a bit vague, could also refer to lost continents, such as those that have been submerged underwater due to the plates of Earth shifting over millions of years. However, because the topic was a bit too vague, I don't feel comfortable giving a direct answer on it. Archons. To understand this one, you have to understand an idea called Gnosticism. So Gnosticism, from what I've gathered, is a collection of spiritual and religious beliefs that basically say that we as humans are actually spiritual beings trapped in a material world. But Gnostics believe that it is possible for you to ascend and escape this material world and possibly ascend into a more spiritual world. In order to do so, you must attain this special knowledge. Now, the way that Archons tie into this is that they are the beings that created this physical world that we live in, and these beings are what stop us from leaving the material realm. It is said that Archons are evil and demon-like, and that they attempt to lead people astray from finding the spiritual world. They might even appear as shadow figures, people that you and I interact with, objects, or even invisible forces unseen by us. That's the basic concept behind what Archons are, should you choose to believe in Gnosticism. Introspection Rundown. Now, this is a practice that was actually done by the Church of Scientology. It was given the name Introspection Rundown. This practice is upheld when someone is having a psychotic episode or complete mental breakdown. As you can imagine, this is likely a common occurrence in such a church. So what is Introspection Rundown? Introspection Rundown at its core is essentially just solitary confinement. They just lock you in a room for however much time they deem necessary until you calm down. The idea behind this is given enough time with your own thoughts, you will naturally calm yourself down. This has been quite the point of controversy for the Church of Scientology though, as one case with a woman named Lisa McPherson resulted in the death of this poor individual after she was locked in a room for 17 days as part of this introspection rundown. And her appearance after death told a story that she had been denied water and food throughout the entire ordeal. She was found to be severely underweight and severely dehydrated. I believe this process is still done today, but I have been unable to find any type of clear confirmation of this. Disneyland secret tunnels. This is actually a real confirmed fact that Walt Disney World in Florida uses secret underground tunnels. Now there's a few purposes for these tunnels. The first one is pretty obvious, as it's for cast members to get to their station of the park without being seen by park guests. These tunnels were originally created by Walt Disney because he saw a cowboy walking in Tomorrowland and wanted there to be a way to keep up the immersion when these cast members needed to move from one place of the park to another. So the tunnel system was invented in order to maintain the magic. The second, more sinister reason is that Disney has a no one dies in Disney policy that they try to uphold by using these tunnels to transport injured people or hide bodies until the paramedics can transport them out of the park. There have also been a few conspiracies on the secret tunnel, specifically tied to the fact that Disney World has had their fair share of child exploitation problems. Because of news articles like this tying Disney to these trafficking rings, the conspiracies basically wrote themselves, with individuals believing that these tunnels have been used to kidnap children or traffic weak individuals from the Disney park. If you want to hear more stuff related to Disney, I do have a 3-hour Disneyland Iceberg that I just posted a while back, and although all of it's not about conspiracy stuff, there is a good 10 to 15% of it that does have to do with these types of crazy deaths and disturbing history. Mereological Nihilism. This is simply the idea that no actual objects exist. Instead, the objects that you see around us are actually made up of much simpler individual items. Basically, it's like the ship of Theseus. Like, at what point does an object become an object? Like, is a table really a table, or is it not just a set of wooden sticks with a flat top and some nails? But we call it a table because that's just what we've decided to call it. However, the actual object we're seeing is not a table. There is no table. It's only simpler objects arranged in this certain manner, and we've just given it and labeled it this name. Now it's a little more nuanced than that, and it ties more into like spiritual thinking, but that's just the basic concept that I got when researching this, and I don't think there's a lot more to explain besides that. Feel free to leave me more information in the comments though, and I probably will touch on it in the next video should I think it's significant enough. Online video game monitoring. This one's a bit self-explanatory, but this is the general idea that video games are being spied on by the government. This topic blew up a bit when Edward Snowden revealed in some classified documents that the NSA and Britain's government communication headquarters were allegedly monitoring the gaming community with the belief that the virtual world was somehow providing a cover for terrorists and criminal groups. This absolutely filled people with paranoia, because this basically told us that even something as innocent as video game usage is being monitored as if we are all criminals. I know I probably shouldn't find it funny, but I think it's a little humorous to imagine like these secret groups forming like GTA 5 lobbies to do their like little nefarious plans and whatnot. Let me know if anyone else think that that's like a little humorous. I'm just imagining like 5-card meetups in like GTA. Like, I don't know, to me it's a little funny, but nonetheless it is kind of scary to think about the fact that, you know, we are being monitored at all times, even in video games like GTA 5 or, you know, whatever video game you feel like playing. Hierarchal states of reality. I could be wrong on this one, but I believe this refers to the idea that cults will lure people into believing that their current state of consciousness is not the only state of consciousness. And they also lead you on by saying that in order to attain higher levels of reality, you must do so by performing certain actions in order to move up the hierarchy of reality. Again, I could be wrong on this one, but that's what I found a lot while researching this topic. Mexican sugar dancing. Not going to spend too much time on this one because it's just freaking disgusting, but this is when people dig up freshly buried corpses and use metal poles and electricity to give it life and force the body to move in a way that will pleasure someone. I'm hoping that that was descriptive enough to imagine what people are doing with that kind of thing. Is it real? There have been a few posts on Reddit here and there that claim to have clips and footage of the real thing, but others seem to believe it's just one of those made up ideas to scare people, and I sure hope it is. Corporate kill lists. Some choose to believe that major corporations have these kill lists, which in layman's terms doesn't mean a literal list of people to kill, but more that companies will have someone done away with if that person is affecting their overall profit. For example, if a company finds out that getting rid of someone in their company means making potentially more millions of dollars, you best believe that the company will do whatever it takes to make sure that that person is no longer affiliated or in the way of their company's profits. So it's not really the idea of an actual list that they're ticking off. It's more just like, there's this boundary in my way. I don't care if it's a person or an inanimate thing. I'm going to get rid of it at all costs, which is pretty scary to say the least. Lord Pakal's time machine. Might be pronouncing this one wrong, but Lord Pakal's time machine is in reference to this painting that was done around 600 CE. This is a reproduction of the sarcophagus lid of King Pakal the Great that has been the source of some controversy. People have interpreted this image as a rocket ship of sorts, believing that the way the man in the painting is sitting down mirrors that of a person that would sit inside of a rocket ship that is about to leave the planet. Some also think that it is completely real due to how the logistics of such a painting being created would go down. This next part is just taken verbatim from someone in the comments on Reddit. I don't personally believe this, but for sake of argument, here goes. Imagine you are a space alien being and you come to visit Earth. The last thing you'd want is for the primitive life forms known as humans to go inside your only vehicle capable of space travel and accidentally break it. So instead, you choose to describe your spacecraft to the primitive human in a way that they can understand. And the result is this loosely based and somewhat similar painting of a man in a rocket ship. So if that didn't make sense to you, essentially, if you had a rocket ship and you came to visit, basically idiots, people that don't speak your language and can't understand the advanced concepts you have, you probably wouldn't let them, go around your rocket ship and mess around in it, right? So you'd probably be very protective of it, because a lot of people have basically said, if someone came down and did that, why wouldn't they allow us to use it and whatnot? But the way I see it, it's kind of like how you wouldn't give your infant child an expensive camera to play with. You'd give them like a toy camera to mess around with. And because of that, people believe that this drawing is an interpretation of what they saw that one day, and that what it would be like to actually sit inside and ride it in the rocket ship. That's what the sarcophagus lid is telling us. Is it real? It's your interpretation. I can totally see people believing that, but I don't know. It seems a little loosely based for me, but I could definitely see this one being really believable. The Ummo Case. From what I was able to gather, around the 1960s, scientists in France and Spain began to receive these rather strange letters in the mail. The alleged sender of these letters were aliens from planet Ummo. Throughout these letters, the same weird logo and symbol could be seen on each one, with all the letters showcasing the aliens' interest in how humans and society worked. Wanting to know more about human concepts like art and generally how humans went about their daily lives. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this one does appear to be fake, or at the very least not entirely true. I can already hear the people in the comments typing about how I'm wrong and I'm not a believer and I'm a follower, but Just hold your horses and allow me to present the information that I actually found online. In all my videos, I try to put out all the information that I find, and these two websites state otherwise on the Ummo affair. Based on the two sources that I will leave a link to below, it appears that the entire Ummo case was the mere work of a man named Jose Luis Jordan Peña, who simply wanted to perform an experiment, if you will, and showcase how paranoia and mass hysteria could affect even our supposed greatest logical thinkers like world elites and scientists. One source is an article written about the event, and the other is a supposed interview with the man himself, and both seem to align properly with the core idea of it being a simple social experiment, with Jose Peña utilizing some of his connections to phony up images of UFOs with the symbol on it, as well as getting unknown materials moved to those supposed landing spots of the Ummo aircraft. All of his hard work was meant to show off exactly how gullible people can be, and seeing as it's still debated today, I think it's safe to say that most people are. Maybe this is also like a lie. Maybe I'm the gullible person here and just believe whatever website I'm going on, but obviously there is no telling with definitive proof if either of these are true. And one of the sources even goes over the loose ends on the matter if you choose to believe Jose Peña's story. So believe what you want. I'm going to leave a link to both for you guys to go over in the comments. The Titanic didn't sink. This one is rather interesting, and I think it's one of the more believable conspiracies on this list. So everyone knows the story of the Titanic, the supposed invincible, unsinkable ship that had one of the most experienced crews driving it, hitting an iceberg in the dead of night, and sank over the course of 2 hours. Or did it? You see, the White Star Line, which was the company that owned the Titanic, also owned another ship by the name of the Olympic. The Olympic had supposedly undergone some serious damage a few months prior to the Titanic incident, potentially costing White Star Line tons of money to repair the ship. So it is believed that the company simply switched the names of the two ships and chose to ship off the Olympic instead of the Titanic in order to cash in on the insurance claims that they knew they would get because it was going to sink. Some evidence that backs this up is the fact that the photos of the Titanic as it's leaving seem to resemble the Olympic. There are a few holes in this theory though, and because I try to be as objective as possible, I feel like I should include these. It is said that the insurance claims on these ships wouldn't be nearly as much as it costed to repair the ships, resulting in a net loss for the White Star Line still. Another small note is that there is a clear discrepancy with the labeling of some items on the ship. The Olympic and the Titanic were both given numbers that were labeled on several parts of the ship. The Olympic was labeled with the number 400 and the Titanic labeled with the number 401. And while some pieces have been uncovered as 401, which it should be if it were the Titanic, there were also some other pieces uncovered that state SS 400, which would indicate that it is from the Olympic. John Babbacombe Lee. John Babbacombe Lee, otherwise known as the man they couldn't hang. He was convicted of the murder of his employer, Ummo Case, and despite lacking in proof and definitive evidence that he was in fact the one that murdered her, he was sentenced to death by hanging. This was wild because the only evidence that they had on him was that he was the only known man in her home at the time of the murder and had one unexplained cut on his arm. This was the only evidence that they used to pin the murder on him, and he claimed innocence until the day of his hanging. However, it was on this day that something strange occurred. The trapdoor was tested and worked properly, but when they had John step onto it and the trapdoor was pulled, it just wouldn't work. He stepped off again, they tested it, it worked, but again when he went to step on the trapdoor himself, it just would not work. They repeated this process once more until they decided to just give him life in prison instead. Some believe that this was the source of divine intervention, wanting John Lee to stay alive for whatever divine purpose that he actually had. Pokaini Forest. In the Pokaini Forest, which is located in Latvia, you can find these strange clusters of stones that have no explanation as to how they ended up there. What's even weirder than the fact that they just somehow appeared here is the fact that given enough time, these stones will actually relocate themselves from one place to another. And they do this so frequently that even some of the locals have begun to notice this. And these aren't like very tiny rocks that anyone can just move. Like, it'd take some serious heavy lifting in order to move just one of these from one spot to another. Because of how difficult it would be to upkeep this, secret of moving rocks on a daily basis in the dark with no one noticing, it's led many to believe that there is some spiritual force at work. With this belief in mind, many self-proclaimed psychics and witches will visit this site to boost their spiritual energy. Another proposed explanation is that there might have been some planned castle at this location and it was abandoned a long time ago for one reason or another. Sea People. The Sea Peoples are a hypothesized group that existed from 1200 BCE all the way to 900 BCE. And it's said that this group is to have attacked ancient Egypt and other regions in the East Mediterranean. What's wild though is that there doesn't stand any documented origins of the Sea Peoples, just that they were a bit larger than the average human and were apparently great fighters. They are also stated to be responsible for the late Bronze Age collapse and destroying other related empires. The mystery of this group is that it's not just one singular group of people, but rather a ton of several different groups coming from different parts of the Mediterranean during different times, leaving many to question who exactly these people were, where did they come from, and why exactly were they so quick to attack everything on sight. Cryptogeography. This is simply the study of paranormal or supernatural spaces. When you hear cryptogeography, think stuff like the Bermuda Triangle or the Crystal Skulls, or insert any haunted site here. If it fits into this idea of a paranormal location, then it's been studied and categorized under cryptogeography. Quantum jumping. Quantum jumping at its core is the idea that people in times of distress can purposely choose to jump from one universe to another parallel universe. This is done for the person jumping to gain some knowledge about situations that they have yet to encounter. The difference between this and other ideas on the iceberg that contain the same sort of universe jumping is that this one is done with purpose and intent. It's done with the intent of going into another parallel universe and experiencing other incidents in your life that you have not encountered on your original timeline. Temporary autonomous zones. I believe temporary autonomous zones refers to the concept of creating areas or designated zones that allow for people to come together and exchange all sorts of topics, ideas, and beliefs with complete and utter freedom. The reason that we would need to do this is to keep the government from encroaching on too much culture, freedom, and otherwise personal expression. If these autonomous zones existed, we would be able to, as a community or the human race, come together and talk about serious issues without the implication of being thrown in jail or anything of the sort. I'm pretty sure that that is exactly what this is referring to, but it could also tie into some other conspiracy stuff that I didn't find in my research. Cuban yellow balloons. In the 1960s, the US Coast Guard found an 18-inch square crate floating off the coast of Florida. The crate was marked, letting it be known that it was from the USSR and addressed to be shipped to Cuba. Inside the mysterious box was 7 inflated yellow balloons. A few days later, another crate of similar condition was found elsewhere in Florida, but that one contained absolutely nothing. The wild part of the incident is that nothing about the crate stood out as special, and even after examining what was inside the balloons, it was apparent that they were just ordinary yellow balloons with no special gas or air inside of them. So the question still stands: why the hell were these crates sent, and what value did they bring at all? Zamora Incident. On April 24th of 1964, a policeman by the name of Lonnie Zamora reported that he saw two beings beside a UFO balloon-shaped tiny object that later rose into the air, accompanied by flames. At around 6 p.m., Zamora had asked dispatcher Nep Lopez through a radio call to look out their window to see if they could spot such an object. Zamora explained the look of the object, and thus the entire incident gained widespread popularity because of it being labeled as a UFO sighting. The US Air Force labeled the case as unknown in Project Blue Book, which is a code name for the study of these UFOs. The entire incident took place in New Mexico and has been given few explanations. The most notable are it being a hoax, which is believed by many New Mexico tech students, and the more conventional explanation is that there was a lunar lander test done by the White Sands Missile Range. No one truly knows what Zamora saw that day. Was it a UFO, or was it a simple test landing? Presentism. This is the notion that people should not view past events with such a modern mindset. The reasoning for this is because it's nearly impossible for humans to completely understand what life was like living like 200 years ago. No one can truly understand the societal standards and unwritten rules of living in any time besides their own. And as such, looking at history and trying to interpret it is fruitless, because whatever interpretation you come up with will always be tainted with your more modern values. Instead, we should focus on the present day and live in the current time, absorbing and digesting what's happening now, as we can fully align and interpret media with our current values and have our arguments and opinions be more valid than if we were to look at historical events. Toronto Protocol. Some French documents were found in the 1980s and given out to some world elites. These documents entailed the usual conspiracy lingo, New World Order, talking about passing agendas and how they'd go about passing said agendas. We all kind of know how this talk goes. I will say that trying to find legitimate sources talking about this idea was extremely difficult. The only real evidence I found that such documents ever existed was this book about it titled The Toronto Protocol, and this long Reddit post, which I think is either the actual document just typed up verbatim, or it's an excerpt from the document. Google Earth Black Zones. A bit self-explanatory, but there are several parts and areas on Google Earth where the entire region of any given location is just heavily blurred or just completely blacked out from sight. A lot of these are what you might expect, like air bases for military use, nuclear sites, North Korea, and many others. However, some have noticed that there are areas that shouldn't be blacked out or blurred at all. One of the most notable being areas of Antarctica being completely blurred out and unable to be seen by Google Earth. Some interpret this as it having to do with Richard E. Byrd and his expedition of Antarctica. He's involved because people believe that what he says in some interviews and his diaries are evidence of hollow earth theory, which just so happens to be the next thing that we are talking about. Hollow earth. Many think that the earth is not completely full, and instead the earth is hollow and that it holds land containing the lost cities, giants, lizard people, and whatever conspiracy group that is hiding, insert their name here. That's where people basically believe that all of these groups are hiding. The biggest piece of evidence for this, as stated before on the Iceberg, comes from Admiral Richard E. Byrd's diary from his Antarctica expeditions, where he implied that there is more land beyond what he saw, leading many to believe that he was referring to Hollow Earth and the aforementioned Agartha from the earlier layers on this iceberg. Serpent Seed. The first two sons of Adam and Eve were Cain and Abel. If you are knowledgeable on religion, this should be well-known information. The serpent seed is a controversial belief that sin was introduced to the world via the devil mating with Eve. The story goes on that when the devil appeared as a serpent in the Garden of Eden, he actually mated with Eve, and the offspring that came out was to be Cain. Since Cain was the first person to commit homicide, he quite literally brought sin into the world via the serpent's seed. Panopticon. The Panopticon was a concept for a potential prison design. Essentially, there would be a central observation tower placed within a circle of prison cells. From the tower, a single guard could see into every single one of the cells. However, the cell inmates would not be able to see into the tower. This idea was to create a sense of doubt in the prisoners, since they would never truly know if they were being watched at any given moment. inherently giving the single person in the tower control over everyone in the prison. The basic takeaway here is the concept of utilizing a small power to control a bigger power. And you can take this idea into some governments of today, more specifically the US government. We are supposedly being monitored almost everywhere, which might make a lot of people question whether or not they should be doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. You know, maybe we'll consider not doing quote unquote illegal activity because we are scared and fearful that we might be being watched at any given time. Crowd-funded assassinations. This is in reference to the theory that some believe happens on the deep, dark depths of the internet. It suggests that individuals and secret groups like the Illuminati use online platforms to raise money for the purpose of hiring assassins to kill a specific person or world elite. The biggest proponent of this theory is the anonymity that the internet provides and the ease of crowdfunding that would make it easily possible to raise money for such heinous acts. Russian crime dungeons. This one suggests that the Russian organized crime groups operate underground dungeons in which they hold victims captive and subject them to various forms of torture, abuse, and otherwise exploitation. Some versions of this theory claim that these dungeons are used to extort money from victims or coerce them into doing all types of illegal activities. Universal communion. The universal communion is an idea where a secret group or organization is working to bring about a universal spiritual awakening or enlightenment of sorts. This would be done through the aforementioned mind control techniques or hidden messages in art and media. Proponents of this theory believe that this group is working to create a global community of individuals who are spiritually awakened and connected to one another through some sorts of universal consciousness. Acoustic attacks. This proposes that it is possible for elites to use high-frequency sound waves or other types of acoustic energy to attack or harm people, often with the aim of causing physical discomfort or disorientation of some sort, with people pointing to the use of ultrasound or infrasound to get the job done. The basis for this theory comes from one specific event that happened in 2017, where a number of US embassy employees in Havana, Cuba had experienced physical symptoms that included hearing loss, dizziness, and other alike symptoms that were described as attacks or incidents involving these high-frequency sound waves. Many took these events as definitive proof of this entire concept. Numerology. This is the general belief that certain numbers or certain numerical patterns hold some type of power or significance in the world, and that these numbers are used by secret groups or organizations to manipulate events and control the world in some way, shape, or form. One of the more infamous numbers being the mark of the devil, or the number 3, which represents the Holy Trinity in Christianity. Coronal heating. This one is rather short, so basically it's just a theory that suggests the high temperatures of the sun's outer atmosphere are the results of some sort of external energy source or manipulation. Presumably, rather than being caused by the sun's own internal process, it's actually being caused by some outside source, and it's manipulated in order to do nefarious acts. Insert conspiracy here. Plastic surgery runaways. I believe this is in reference to how some people that were victims of human trafficking or other crimes will undergo plastic surgery and run away from the clinic or hospital in order to go missing. The idea here is that the victim is able to change their physical appearance in order to go cognito, to avoid being captured and subjected to the same torture as before. This also goes a step further, as it could explain why there's a bountiful amount of missing people that have never been found, as they would have changed their face and kind of blended into society after the fact. Ghost condensate. This one suggests that a type of exotic matter known as ghost condensate may be responsible for a variety of strange phenomena, including time travel and other forms of time manipulation. Proponents of this theory often point to various scientific experiments and observations as evidence of the existence of ghost condensates and that they may speculate about the potential uses or implications of this matter, possibly being used for nefarious acts. Again, insert any type of conspiracy that has to do with time travel here. Fracking Deaths. Fracking deaths is in reference to the process of hydraulic fracturing, or otherwise known as fracking. This is used to extract natural gas and oil from shale formations. The reason this is on here is because of the possible cause of a high number of deaths or negative health effects that result from doing this type of fracking action. Believers of this point to reports of increased rates of cancer or other health problems in areas where fracking is taking place, and that this is evidence of these negative effects being completely real and valid. Microchimerism. This one is extremely short. This one is basically the idea that there is the presence of cells from one individual within the body of another individual, and that may be responsible for a variety of unusual or explained phenomena, such as unexplained physical symptoms or psychic abilities. That's all I was able to gather from reading any post or anything regarding microchimerism. Feel free to leave anything in the comments regarding this. I was just gonna leave this one out, but I figured I would read that out to anyone that maybe that makes sense to somebody. This made no sense to me, but I felt like including it just so I could say that I did include it in the video. Last Thursdayism. This is the belief that the concept of time may have been created much more recently than is commonly believed, and the concept of the past could just be seen as an illusion or a hallucination. People have pointed to various philosophical or scientific ideas such as eternalism, or the idea that time is a human construct, as evidence of this theory. The more well-known version of this theory relates to religion, specifically to the time that God created everything in the universe. It is stated that when God made Adam and Eve and everything along with it, he had to have created the earth looking like it's existed for millions of years, and the grass had to have been designed to look a certain age. If you take this idea and run with it, you can take it so far that it's possible that, whatever creator made all this around us, if he's able to design and manipulate the world in such a way to age things and create things in whatever manner he deems is, reasonable, it's entirely possible for him to have created everything as soon as last Thursday. And every memory you have in your mind right now is just another sliver that the creator has slipped and created in your mind. I've thought about this myself as a child, but I didn't know it had an actual name. I always thought of it like, what if all my memories never actually happened and I was just created yesterday? You wouldn't know. No one would actually know. If you were actually created yesterday with all the memories you have of today, there's no real way for you to find that out to be true, because everyone else would also be treated the same exact way. So even though this one's just more of a concept, it is pretty interesting to think about. Acoustic. In the same vein as the last theory, this one suggests that the universe and the concept of reality itself could also be an illusion, and that there could be some kind of external force or entity that is responsible for creating and maintaining these illusions. So basically just apply that last little snippet of last Thursdayism, but to the entire concept of the universe. Patomskiy Crater. In Siberia, there exists a large crater simply known as the Patomskiy Crater. This is said to be the result of some unexplained phenomenon, such as an alien impact or an ancient nuclear explosion. What's really strange about this one is that research of the crater seemingly stopped after one researcher died of a heart attack when he started approaching the structure. The unusual features of this crater and the lack of a clear explanation for its formation, as well as the fact that someone literally died of a heart attack when approaching it, serve as evidence for why this theory exists and why there's tons of speculation surrounding how this crater was made and why it was made. Phantom kangaroos. So there have been sightings of mysterious kangaroo-like creatures in areas where kangaroos are not native. Some believe that this is either some sort of hoax or cover-up rather than being genuine sightings of mysterious beings. However, a few people have pointed out that it is entirely possible that these creatures are real, undocumented species that are in a close relation to the kangaroo family. Since this theory took off, there has been a lot of people that have claimed to have found physical evidence of bones from the supposed animal. This has led many to think that these phantom kangaroos are actually just a new species that no one's ever documented before. Operation Paperclip. This theory suggests that the US government covertly recruited scientists and engineers from Nazi Germany after World War II, and they did this as part of a special secret program known as Operation Paperclip. Believers of this theory will point to historical documents and eyewitness accounts detailing that these Germans helped us win the space race against Russia, and that it's possible that there is some sort of nefarious plot that we don't know about going on behind the scenes. Negative Planck feedback. The concept of negative Planck feedback is easier to explain when you all know what Planck feedback is. Planck feedback means the higher the temperature of any radiating body, the more energy it will radiate around it. So negative Planck feedback basically tries to cancel out the radiation of something by adding heat to it, hoping to induce the opposite outcome and reduce radiation. It also has to do with the idea of creating or manipulating this energy loop in order to create the concept of unlimited energy. Dighton Rock. Dighton Rock is a large boulder that sits in Massachusetts with mysterious inscriptions on it. Though it might be the work of ancient civilizations or extraterrestrial beings, the true meaning or purpose behind these inscriptions might be the subject of a possible cover-up or some sort of secret. What's crazy about this specific rock is that the deep inscriptions don't really make any logical sense, and it's since frustrated the minds of many that try to actually decrypt the rock's meaning. Also, unrelated to the actual inscriptions on the boulder, people don't even understand how the rock ended up there in the first place, as there are no recorded documents that explain how exactly this rock ended up in this spot in Massachusetts. Portoya. This one is pretty interesting. So if you use 4chan a lot, one of the things you will know about the website is that whenever someone posts or comments on 4chan, they have their origin or country flag displayed by their name. What sparked interest in this idea of Portoya is the fact that a few users started popping up with a new unseen flag that simply had the name of Portoya. What brought massive attention to this idea though is the fact that the users suddenly had all of their posts removed, and 4chan acted like nothing ever happened. This has led people to think that Portoya is a real place that exists either in a parallel universe or could possibly be one of those ancient lost cities that we have yet to document. ICBM Decoy. ICBM, otherwise known as the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, is a deterrent that countries use in order to maintain peace. However, some believe that these ICBMs are merely decoys and that some countries have fake ICBMs because faking them would be a lot cheaper than just actually creating one. Obviously, countries would rather have a fake ICBM than nothing, because if you have one floating in the air, it's going to scare other countries from possibly sending missiles their way. And, basically it's going to scare people into not messing with you. At its core, it's the conspiracy that there are a few countries that might just be bluffing their way into peace, and that they don't actually have any nuclear weapons to threaten other countries with. They're simply ICBM decoys. Now, before ending this one off, I have two things to shout out: the Patreon shoutout and the Google Form shoutout to those who actually helped along the way. I want to say thanks to everyone that actually contributed to the Google Forms back when we were using them. We will not be using them going forward just because I don't really have any use for them as of late. I do have someone that is helping me do the research for this specific iceberg, and also the information is a lot more readily available nowadays as opposed to before, where there was no real information on the internet. Now, with all of that said, let's get to the patron shoutout. A humongous thanks to everyone that has subscribed to the Your Everyday Theorist tier on the Patreon, the most expensive tier at $10. Thank you guys so much, dude. Honestly, thank you guys. You guys really are the ones making this possible. Obviously right now we don't have too many people, but hopefully by the end of this year we'll be in like the hundreds, if not the thousands. I'm gonna try and pump out a lot more Patreon content, and also exclusive like merch, plushies, toys, stickers, and whatever I might think you guys will be interested in. If you want to get 1 day early access to any of my videos, go ahead and choose the Your Everyday Patron or the Your Everyday Theorist tier on the Patreon. You guys will get 1 day early access to every single video that comes out of my channel, and if you choose the highest tier, you get some bonus exclusive behind the scenes content, as well as a shout out at the end of all my videos. Now with all that said, I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.